and the Bretson Young Injury Lawyers Arena, and it's our pleasure to bring you a Kansas gubernatorial debate. I'm Greg Akagi with WIBW Radio and the Kansas Radio Networks, and I'll serve as your moderator for today's debate for Kansas governor. Before I introduce the candidates, can you hear me now? Before we introduce the candidates, I want to introduce the folks who will be asking the questions. Our media panel includes Nick Gosnell, who is the news director with WIBW Radio and the Kansas Information Network in Topeka. We also have Michael Schwenke, anchor with KWCH-TV in Wichita. Dwayne Taves, farm director with KFRM 550 AM in Clay Center, and Dina Sadler, who is the former Southwest Kansas Group publisher and now contributor for Gatehouse Media. Today's timekeeper is Dan Johnson, farm broadcaster with WIBW Radio and the Kansas Agriculture Network in Topeka. And I also want to introduce our interpreters. They are to my right, far stage right, to your left. On stage right now is Mary Schmidt, and later you will see Laura Reimer. They will serve as our interpreters for today. Today's debate will have three candidates. They will each have 90 seconds for an opening and closing statement. The candidate that first answers the question from the media panel will have 1 minute to respond, with the other two candidates having 45 seconds to respond to the question. And the candidate who answers first will also have 30 seconds of rebuttal time. A note to our audience here at the Bretson Young Injury Lawyers Arena. Please be courteous in responding to each of the candidates, and please refrain from responding until they've completed their statements. Remember that you are seeing the candidates in person. We have an audience that's listening to the debate on the radio or online as well. Please respect the fact that they may be undecided in who they will cast their vote for on Tuesday, November 6th, and they're wanting to hear from each of the candidates who are on stage here at the Kansas State Fair. All right, let's get right to the opening statements. As agreed to previously backstage, we have determined the order of the opening and closing statements. So here to have our first opening statement will come from the independent candidate, Greg Gorman.
Good morning. William Allen White, the famed Emporia Gazette editor, once said, when anything's going to happen in America, it happens first in Kansas. Kansas used to be a leader. Other states look to for inspiration. Now we're a cautionary tale. And both parties are to blame. Through the fog of partisan battles, we've lost sight of one really simple truth. This is about improving people's lives. And for the average Kansan, life has gotten much more difficult over the last 2 decades. 82 of our 105 population declines as our children leave for greener pastures. The health of our citizens relative to the rest of the nation since 1991. Our economy has lagged neighboring states, and the average hasn't had a pay increase since 2003. We can and must do better. We need to shake up Topeka and bring new ideas if we want to create a state where our children and grandchildren are inspired to build their lives. This means throwing out failed partisan playbooks and embracing new ideas. It means electing someone who can put Kansas I've spent my life in the private sector creating jobs.
Broaden our tax base without raising taxes, so we can invest in our future, so that every Kansas child has the chance to live their own version of the American dream, so that we can embrace the future confidently. Thank you.
The next opening statement comes from Republican candidate Kris Kobach. We all know that in politics, talk is cheap. Results are something different. As your Secretary of State, I've delivered results. Results some on the left don't like proof of citizenship when you vote. And cutting the size of government in my office. I will continue to deliver results as your governor. My priorities will be cutting taxes and spending, ending the culture of corruption in Topeka, and stopping illegal immigration in Kansas. Now, there are some who say it can't be done. They say there's no way to cut taxes and spending right now. Well, they're wrong, because I did it as Secretary of State. We took my office from a $7.0 million budget now down to a $4.6 million budget, cutting every step of the way. I'll do the same thing as governor in Kansas, cutting spending and then returning that money to the people who own it, the taxpayers. It's your money. It's not the government's money. And that was the missing element in the Brownback administration. I'll admit there was an error there. They cut taxes, but they didn't cut spending. You have to cut spending. Kansas doesn't have a revenue problem. Kansas has a spending problem. And to solve that problem, it takes more than words. It takes action, real action. It's time for a change. Now, my two liberal opponents will offer you more status quo thinking, more big government, but I will promise change for you. And once again, I will deliver on that promise.
And the final opening statement will come from Democratic candidate Laura Kelly.
I'm Laura Kelly. Let me get my time in. I'm a state senator. I'm a wife and a mother. I grew up in a military family. We lived all over the world. By the time I was 15, I had moved 12 times. So when my husband and I had our first child, we wanted to put down some roots, and we chose Kansas 32 years ago. We chose it for the great schools and the good jobs and that strong sense of community. And my daughters both got a world-class education here because of the good teachers, because of the good schools. And that's why I'm running for governor. I want to make sure every child, no matter who they are or where they live, has the same opportunity to succeed. Now, we know this past 8 years, we have gone through a world of hurt. Doesn't matter where we look at our roads, we look at our schools, we look at our economy, we look at health care, all been devastated by the Brownback experiment. So now we have a very important choice. Do we end the experiment once and for all? Continue on the road to recovery, or do we hand the wheel to a man who has promised to drive us right back into the ditch? I have a strong record of bringing Republicans and Democrats together to solve problems. I will get our state back on track. I'll focus on jobs and schools and roads. It's time to slam the door once and for all. Throw away the key on the Brownback experiment and move our state ahead.
All right, now on to our questions from our media panel. And as agreed to previously backstage, Senator Kelly will answer the first question, followed by Secretary Kobach, and then Mr. Orman. The order will rotate throughout the questions. The first question of the day will come from Nick Gosdell with WIBW Radio, the Kansas Information Network in Topeka.
Yes, good morning, Senator Kelly and the other candidates. By statute, the state is supposed to have 7.5% ending balance at the end of each fiscal year. That's been set aside for the last several years, and we commit now to not signing a budget that does not follow that statute.
Senator Kelly, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, I would love to be able to make that promise. I don't think I can. We have not had a 7.5% ending balance for very, very many years. A lot of it caused by the Brownback tax experiment, which devastated our revenues and made it impossible for us to balance our budget in any way other than robbing from our highways, robbing from capers, and cutting our schools, the largest cut for schools in state history. What I will promise you is that as governor, I will work like the devil to get a constitutional amendment to create a rainy day fund for our state so that we are forced, the legislature is forced, I'm forced as governor to put money away so the next time we have a downturn, we've got money in the bank to take care of it, and I will do.
Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, deficit's a problem, and that's part of the reason why we absolutely have to cut spending. You know, when Senator Kelly took office, The state general fund spending was about between $5.5 billion. Now it's up to $7 billion. For 14 years, she's been part of the problem. Ratcheting up spending, and more spending. That is not the government's money. I know Democrats like to think it's the government's money, but it's our money. We earned it. And we need to stop spending so much so the people of Kansas can have that money in their pocket. Now, you know the key tax hikes. In 2015 and 2017, there were two tax hikes, sales and income. They took an average of $900 a year out of the average Kansas family of four. $900 a year out of your pocket, every one of you, because of the tax hikes that she's voting for.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, look, the only way we are going to get out of the situation we're in right now is to grow the Kansas economy. Ultimately, we have to be in a position to grow the economy, broaden the tax base, and put ourselves in the position where we can invest in our priorities. The idea that we have the money right now to be able to do a 7.5% ending balance just doesn't recognize the realities of the situation. By the way, it's not clear to me that a constitutional amendment on a rainy day fund is any different than that. So I think we have to realize we are not going to recover from where we are overnight. It's going to take hard work and a proactive economic development strategy to do that. And I think I'm the candidate to do that for Kansas.
Senator Kelly, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, I think Kris Kobach is making it very clear where he will take us as a state. He will take us back to the devastation that we have just lived through for the past 8 years. What I will do is I will bring together experts on tax policy and the economy, and we will work to forge a path back to a stable, sustainable tax structure that works for the state of Kansas, that can bring down property taxes, lower the sales tax on food. That's what we need to do.
All right, on to our next question.
And this comes from Michael Schwenke with KWCH TV in Wichita.
Well, on behalf of KWCH, thank you for coming out. Thank you to the candidates, and a big thank you to WIBW Radio. My question is regarding job growth. Our unemployment rate is low, but wages are flat, and Kansas job growth continues to lag behind other states. I would like some specific ideas from the candidates on where they would grow the economy and how they would do it.
Secretary Kobach, you have 1 minute to respond.
There are multiple things we have to do to cause our economy to grow. The Kansas Policy Institute had a survey last year of business owners, CEOs, and asked them what the number one issue was. The number one issue was that they needed for their businesses to grow, and they said taxes were too high in Kansas. That's why I'll be returning the Trump windfall to the people of Kansas. Secondly, we will be capping property tax appraisal increases at 2% a year. 2% a year. And then there's something else that we need to think about. Utility rates in Kansas. Here's something you folks over there might not know. We pay 13.4 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity in Kansas. The states around us pay an average of 10.9 cents per kilowatt hour. When businesses come to Kansas, they pay the highest taxes in the 5-state area and the highest utility rates in the 5-state area. If you're serious about creating a pro-business environment, you've got to get both of them down. And Greg has done a lot of great things in the business world, but he's also served as the CEO of a subsidiary of KCP&L that was part of those rate hikes. That's not good for business.
Yeah, you know, again, Secretary, I think you're going back 15 years for that. The rate hikes have occurred more recently. But look, I have spent my life creating jobs and opportunities, and I do the same thing for the state of Kansas. I would do the same thing I would do in the private sector. First, say, how do we leverage our strengths? We're at the geographic center of the United States at a time when our economy is moving quickly from a bricks and mortar to a distributed economy. We should be the intermodal manufacturing capital of America. We should interconnect our power grid with Colorado so that we can ship our renewable and wind energy west. We should build better paths to technical education. I have a plan for giving a revolving loan fund for kids who want to pursue technical and career programs, and a tax credit for public-private partnerships for career education. That's what we need to do. Get employers the workers they need to grow their businesses.
Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Thank you. There are three fundamentals to growing our economy, and we need to get back to those. We need to invest in our schools. We know they are the largest economic driver in the entire state. We have to invest in our roads and our infrastructure, our broadband, in order to grow the economy, and we must expand Medicaid. That too will grow our economy. Those are the three things we need to do. And then we need to put back in place things like the Kansas Bioscience Authority, which was a proven economic driver for our state. We need to bring the things back that were decimated by the Brownback experiment, had to be robbed to pay for his cuts. We'll bring those things back. We'll grow this economy.
Secretary Kobach.
What you just heard from a fairly socialist point of view is spend, spend, spend. Spend all the money you can, and then maybe the economy will grow. Well, we've learned through a century of history that that doesn't work. You can't spend with government spending. You've got to make it possible for businesses to spend their own money and grow. And as far as Greg's point about the electricity rates going up, no, the electricity rates went up from 2007 to 2016, 89%. He was part of the problem, part of the electricity industry when those rates were going up. That's a problem.
Actually, Chris, I stopped working at KCP&L in 2003, so get your facts straight.
Our next question comes from Dina Sadler with Gatehouse Media.
School consolidation has been a controversial and emotionally charged issue. Share your thoughts on whether it will be necessary to merge rural school districts in Kansas in the midst of population declines.
Mr. Orman, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, I've traveled the state of Kansas, and I've had the privilege of meeting with lots of people in rural communities throughout Kansas. And it's amazing to me what they're doing to keep their communities together, the investments that they're making, the work they're doing to revitalize their communities is truly inspiring. I think as I've traveled the state, what I've found is that school districts, by and large, have gone through the process of consolidating functionally without consolidating their school districts. They've figured out how to share best practices. They've figured out how to share resources in a way that allows them to deliver better results while getting the benefits of working together. And so I don't think we need to go through the process of schools consolidation. I think we'll have to allow local control and allow local areas of government to make smart decisions about how they operate their schools.
Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
First and foremost, we must reinvest in our schools. That will help our rural schools. Second of all, we have developed a very detailed, doable rural prosperity plan that will work with our local communities, particularly our rural communities, help them build on their assets so that they have the economic wherewithal to sustain their schools and their hospitals and their businesses. We will work with them. We will be a partner with our rural communities and ensure that they have what they need to be vibrant.
Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
The answer to the question is no, it's not necessary to force consolidation. Many districts do so on their own if they see benefits to be gained. But it is necessary to force school districts to share some of the administrative costs, like IT, so that those can be shared across districts. You know, there is a problem in our educational system, and that is that while teachers' pay has remained stagnant and the number of teachers has not grown quickly, the number of administrators has gone off the charts. Just give you some numbers here. In 1993, from 93 to 18, over the last 25 years, there's been a 17% increase in the number of teachers. But over the same period, the increase in the number of administrators and managers is a 40% increase in administration. That's where the problem is. We need to share administrative costs, have efficiencies, so the money stays in the classroom.
Mr. Orman, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
You know, I believe government has a responsibility to spend every dollar that it's entrusted with wisely. I'm the only person on this stage who has been able to get better results get companies to be more efficient, more effective with limited resources. And so I think we need to look at how we can do that across our whole state government and be in a position to invest in our priorities so we can grow the economy, we can create the jobs and opportunities that keep our kids here.
All right, the next question comes from Dwayne Tays with KFRM 550 AM in Clay Center.
Candidates, it's been said that agriculture in Kansas drives the economy, and the ag economy is hurting at the current moment. What are the biggest issues you see Kansas farmers and ranchers facing, and what can you do as a governor to help Kansas agriculture grow?
Senator Kelly, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, thank you. First of all, one thing I will do is I will work with our congressional delegation so that they're representing Kansas agricultural interests, not special interests back in D.C., and have them deal with the issue of tariff and trade wars, which can wreak havoc on our agricultural community. And second, we will implement, not develop, because Sam Brownback actually implemented a very good 50-year water plan. We'll actually implement that over time to ensure that our agricultural community has what they need to be sustainable over time. And again, I'd go back to our Rural Prosperity Plan, which is a very detailed, very doable plan to work with our agricultural communities to build on their assets and make them sustainable over time and grow that part of our economy.
Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
I'm the only candidate on this stage who actually lives on a crop-producing farm. We have soybeans in the field. The price right now is $8.38. Low commodities prices have hurt farmers, but there's something else that has been hurting farmers even more, and that is high property tax increases. If we cap appraisal increases at 2%, that benefit will flow to Kansas farmers like nothing else. They have been priced out of their fields, some farmers paying $60,000, $80,000 in property taxes alone. That has to stop. We have got to end these stealth tax hikes through appraisal increases. And we also don't need to reappraise every year. Let's reappraise every 2 or 3 years like other states do. We have got to stop taxing them to death, and we've got to stop regulating our farmers to death. That is the solution for agriculture.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, there's 3 things we need to do. Yeah, farmers want a farm. They don't want subsidies. They don't want support. So ultimately, we need to open up new markets for them. I'm the only candidate on stage who actually has a lieutenant governor who spent his life in the agribusiness industry. And one of the things that John will do is lead trade missions for us. We also need new markets. Industrial hemp is something we should give farmers the freedom to farm. And not just research, but we should put the enabling legislation in place so that we can move quickly when the federal government changes the law. We also need to invest in our infrastructure, our roads to bring crops to market, address water in a collaborative way with water rights owners. And finally, we can't drive away the workers that work in agriculture, that work in our dairies, our feedlots, and our farms. If we do that, we would destroy agriculture in western Kansas.
Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Thank you. There's been a slight error here. I actually, too, have a lieutenant governor who has an agricultural background. Lynn Rogers actually grew up and his family still has a dairy farm, and he spent 30 years in agricultural banking. Nobody knows the ag economy like my lieutenant governor, Lynn Rogers. And we will use Lynn's expertise and the expertise of other people we've put on our team to ensure that we are dealing with the issues that our agricultural partners want us to deal with. I was meeting with the Farm Bureau yesterday. They feel neglected and abused. They will have a place at the table in the Kelly administration.
By the way, whoever at the State Fair ordered the 60-degree weather, thank you. So, all right. The next question comes from Nick Gosnell with WIBW Radio and the Kansas Information Network.
One
thing the last two elected governors of Kansas, Democrat Kathleen Sebelius and Republican Sam Brownback, have in common is that they both left the post before their second term was up to take positions in these sitting presidential administrations at the time. Can you commit right now that if you're elected governor of Kansas, you'll stay for as long as the people have called on you to serve?
All right, Secretary Kobach, you have 1 minute to respond.
It is my full intention to serve out not just 4 years, but 8 years as governor of Kansas. And I'll say something else, since my opponents are fond of talking about their lieutenant governors. When it comes to business experience, Wink Hartman has more business experience than this whole audience combined. He is going to be the COO of Kansas, going through each and every agency looking for waste, because remember, it's your money, it's not the government's money. They are not entitled to waste that money. Kansas is in good hands in a Kobach-Hartman administration. We will be focusing on bringing business to stronger prosperity in Kansas and cutting property taxes for everyone and cutting the punishing sales taxes. Did you know we have the 8th highest sales taxes in America? 8th highest. And Ms. Kelly voted for that increase in 2015. It's time for us to stop being the high tax state of the Midwest.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
I absolutely will serve out my 4 years, and I actually will work as governor. I won't delegate the job of running the government to Wink Hartman. I won't appoint a panel of experts to figure it out. I will run the state of Kansas, and I will commit to be here the full 4 years.
And Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Well, I seriously doubt that Donald Trump is going to offer me a position in his administration. However, if he does, I'll say no. I want to be your governor.
And Secretary Kobach, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
I seriously doubt he'll offer that position too. But I will say this, it is important to have a relationship with the president when we're talking about Kansas agriculture. You can stand outside the White House and carry signs and shout all day long, but if you want to affect national policy, you need to be able to have a short line to the White House, and we will have that in Kansas if I am your governor.
All right, the next question comes from Michael Schwenke with KWCH-TV in Wichita.
According to the KBI, violent crime in Kansas increased last year. The number of murders at the highest of any year in Kansas since the FBI began keeping statistics. Do you have a solution to help bring those numbers down?
Mr. Orman, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I don't think there's any silver bullet to address that issue. Obviously, we have to support our law enforcement. We have to support our police community. The other thing is clear is we've gone from being one of the best places in the nation for mental health to a place where mental health is a real issue. So we've got to address the issue of mental health in Kansas. Finally, I also think this is about economic opportunity. If you look at any crime, people commit them for various reasons. And so ultimately, I think we need to grow the Kansas economy. We need to create jobs and opportunities that allow people to lift their lives up instead of putting them in desperate situations where they feel like they have no alternative. And so ultimately, we have to do a lot of things to address that issue. There's not one single simple answer.
Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, we do need to equip our law enforcement agencies with the tools that they need to fight crime. Second of all, though, and I appreciate the fact that Greg has recognized how important our mental health system is. We have not funded that for many, many years, and we absolutely have to get back to that to deal with some of the problems that are causing some of the murder rates to go up. But let us not ignore that the fact that we have to deal with our gun policy in the state of Kansas.
And
Now, I have been a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, but there is no doubt in my mind, and in the mind of many others in Kansas, that it is time that we come together and we form a comprehensive gun sense policy for this
Senator,
state
stop.
and get it implemented.
Okay. Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
If Senator Kelly is a supporter of the Second Amendment, then I'm a supporter of high taxes. In answer to the question, there is, as Greg said, there is no silver bullet, there is no simple answer, but one thing is clear. For violent crimes, we must maintain our law and order posture in Kansas. We must maintain high penalties. And the other thing we should remember, back to Ms. Kelly's point, when the state is not able to deter the criminal, sometimes in that dark parking lot, it is just the private individual and the evildoer. And at that time, concealed carry is necessary to ensure that law-abiding Kansans can protect themselves. That is why we have the Second Amendment, and that is why my opponents should not be trying to restrict concealed carry.
Mr. Orman, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, you know, I'm a little confused about Senator Kelly's statement. You know, Senator Kelly is the only person on the stage who co-sponsored the Constitutional Carry Amendment, which says in Kansas, while you're required to have 1,000 hours of training to legally wax an eyebrow, anybody can carry a concealed weapon without a minute's worth of training. I actually own guns. I believe we had a good concealed carry law that allowed for someone to carry a concealed weapon with training, and I think we need to go back to that.
You are listening to a Kansas gubernatorial debate with the three candidates here at the Kansas State Fair in Hutchinson as we move on to our next question, and it will come from Dina Sadler with Gatehouse Media.
A recent study found 1/3 of the rural hospitals in Kansas at risk of closure. Rural hospitals disproportionately serve elderly, low-income patients, a population heavily dependent on Medicare and Medicaid. Please tell us your thoughts on how expansion of the state's Medicaid program would address those challenges, and how can Kansas best address underserved rural communities in need of greater access to health care services?
Senator Kelly, you have 1 minute to respond.
I have been a strong, if not the strongest, advocate for Medicaid expansion in the state of Kansas. You know, we have left $2.7 billion back in Washington, D.C., taxpayer dollars from Kansas, back in Washington, D.C., to be distributed to other states for them to take care of their people, to keep their hospitals open, and for them to grow their economies. I will expand Medicaid as your governor, and I will help those rural hospitals. The other thing that I will do is I will reform our CanCare system, which has been a disaster since the very, very beginning. It has denied payments to our rural providers, whether there are hospitals or nursing facilities, and they have been responsible for the closure and the bankruptcy of a number of these kinds of facilities. We must reform CanCare, and we must expand Medicaid.
Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
And money grows on trees. The estimates are that expanding Medicaid in Kansas would cost $1.1 million, and that's just the estimate. In every state that has expanded Medicaid, they have found that the actual cost was far greater. In Ohio, it was twice the estimated cost. In Illinois, it was 4 times the estimated cost. So if you talk to people like this who think that money just grows on trees and don't realize that it is the taxpayers' money, then of course you will always spend more, but you won't actually look at the numbers. The better approach is to do something smart and to look at how we can spend that money effectively. That's why I have introduced a proposal for direct primary care in these services. So for $50 a month, you get unlimited access to your primary care doctors and pennies a pill.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, I've traveled the state of Kansas. I've talked to regional hospitals. I've talked to critical access hospital administrators. I know they're struggling. But it's not just an issue for rural Kansas. This is an issue of fairness. It's an issue of workforce development. You know, in Kansas, to qualify for CanCare, you need to earn under 38% of the poverty line. To get subsidies through the Affordable Care Act, you have to earn 138%. So if you're a single working mother earning $10 an hour and you get sick, we send you the perverse message: if you want health care, quit your job. We can't do that. We can expand Medicaid in a responsible way, a way that doesn't cost the state money, a way that allows us to develop our workforce and address rural issues as well.
And Senator Kelly, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
What Kris Kobach is talking about is concierge care. That works for you only if you don't get sick. If you break a bone, you get cancer, you are out of luck. You know, I'm for Medicaid expansion because a healthy Kansan is a productive Kansan. A productive Kansan adds to our economy and grows our state.
All right. The next question comes from Dwayne Tays with KFRM 550 AM in Clay Center.
Candidates, Kansas producers need access to markets with fair and equitable trade agreements. What role can you play as governor to help and assist in trade promotion efforts?
Secretary Kobach, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, there's absolutely quite a bit we can do. One of which is, though, that we have to recognize that access to foreign markets is something that we have to fight for. And President Trump, through his efforts to actually have fair trade so that American businesses don't have to compete on an uneven playing field, he's actually, for the first time, any Republican, any Democrat in the last 50 years has tried to even the trade imbalance. And we as a country need to stand firm behind the president. You know, the Chinese, the Chinese use the one hammer they have against us, soybeans, but they forgot one thing. They import 90% of their soybeans, and they aren't able to replace American soybeans. We're seeing that happen right now. But if there is ever a situation where Kansas farmers are in need of the president's attention, I can pick up the phone and call him, and we can change on a dime.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, I understand the strategy the president's pursuing, and frankly, for all Kansas farmers, I hope he's successful with it. Ultimately, it's a risky strategy. It's a strategy that could potentially disrupt not only trade today, but trade for a long time. Because when these supply chains get broken, rebuilding them is difficult. And so, you know, again, I believe and I hope that the president is successful in his approach. With that said, in an Orman administration, my Lieutenant Governor, John Dahl, will be principally responsible for traveling the country and making sure we have access to markets. John will be on a lot of planes. I apologize, Janet. He will be on a lot of planes. He will be heading to the places we need to head to, like Cuba and other places where we don't have trade relationships today, and making them happen for us.
Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
As I said before, I will put pressure on our congressional delegation to send a message to the president that we need to deal with this tariff and trade war now and get it over with. The other thing we'll do, though, as a Kelly administration, is we will develop our own Department of Commerce. We will make it robust again so that it can work with the governor, go to these foreign countries and cut our own deals. Make it work for Kansans.
And Secretary Kobach, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, at the end of the day, we will see what happens with regard to the tariff negotiations. But in the meantime, the governor of Kansas can do something about the situation our farmers face. Cutting property taxes, capping, is something that will give us relief right here, right now. The other thing is cutting regulations. That's something the administration can do without a vote in the legislature. We will be cutting regulations that restrict our farmers right here, right now. We can bring relief today and not watch Washington and try to see what happens.
All right, the next question will come from Nick Gosnell with WIBW Radio and the Kansas Information Network in Topeka.
The Kansas Department of Transportation has had to bear the brunt of budget cuts for much of the Brownback administration. How will you guarantee the continued maintenance of our infrastructure going forward?
Mr. Orman, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, the T-Works program has had $2.5 billion or so swept out of it over the last 5 years. If we want Kansas to be the intermodal manufacturing and the logistics capital of America, we obviously have to invest in our infrastructure. We have an economic development plan that calls for layering in $80 million a year in additional spending for our roads and our bridges over the level that we were at in the prior fiscal year. That's not going to get back to where we were, but we're in a situation where we have to do this over time. I actually plan to pay for it by ultimately finding savings in government. Look, we've got a program in Kansas City where we're paying people to move from one side of the state line road to the other. I talked to the CEO of AMC Theaters about this. They got paid $45 million to move their offices. Their employees stayed living in the same home, shopped in the same place. The state of Kansas didn't benefit. We need to draw a no-fly zone around Kansas City and stop wasting dollars when we can invest them in our future.
Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah, I remember I moved to Kansas 32 years ago. It wasn't long after that that under the Governor Hayden administration, we put into place the 10-year comprehensive transportation plan. We maintained that for 25 years, and it worked. Kansas had the best roads, the newest roads, the roads where they needed to go in the entire country. We let that go under the administration of the Brownback people. Without that, what we have done is we have destroyed the possibility of economic development, particularly in our rural areas. When we look down at southeast Kansas, how long have they been promised a 4-lane highway or Route 69? Don't know. Route 54 going out west, how many years have they been offered that, promised that, and it's not been kept? We must do better.
Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Kansas does have good highways right now. We're number 2 in the country. That's just a fact. I know facts aren't liked by people on the left. We're number 2 in America. And I see it every time I cross the state line when I'm traveling with my 5 kids and traveling with my wife. We go to Nebraska, go into Missouri, and the car starts vibrating because the roads are worse there. So we have good highways, but they're going to get worse if we don't spend money keeping them up. We have got to repair them, and for the past 3 years, there's been $600 million taken from the highway fund, $600 million to balance the budget. And the reason is because of the profligate spending on the left, spending on everything else, increasing our budget, and stealing from the highway fund. You've got to have somebody who can cut spending if we want to build those highways.
Mr. Orman, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, you know, I realize Secretary Kobach would think Ronald Reagan is a liberal today. But in this regard, I actually think he raises an interesting question, which is we've heard Senator Kelly talk about all the things she wants to spend money on. She wants to lower the sales tax on food. She wants to lower property taxes, and yet her answer for how she's going to pay for it is a panel of experts. And ultimately, I think that's an interesting question that needs to be answered. How are you going to pay for it?
You are listening to the Kansas gubernatorial debate here at the Kansas State Fair in the Bretson Young Injury Lawyers Arena in Hutchinson. Our next question comes from Michael Schwenke, KWCH-TV in Wichita.
Several states have legalized recreational marijuana. Many more have have legalized medicinal marijuana. Would you support any change in marijuana laws here in Kansas, and do you see any benefits to changes to Kansas farmers?
Senator Kelly, you have 1 minute to respond.
I do support legalization of medical marijuana. Yep. I know from the work that I've done in the legislature the difference it can make in the lives of children with severe epilepsy, in people with long sustained chronic pain, and those who are elderly and in hospice. The medical world has moved alongside us now, believe that there actually are benefits to be used for medical marijuana. So I will vote to legalize medical marijuana. I think in terms of recreational marijuana, we're not there yet, but what we do need to do is address our sentencing guidelines where we're incarcerating non-violent offenders. We need to find a better way. It's not good for them and their families, and it's costing the state a fortune.
Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Well, fortunately, medical science has already developed a way to get the beneficial effects of marijuana, the CBD, in pill form. And the FDA is on the verge of approving a CBD pill. So those who claim, oh, we still need to legalize medical marijuana, are actually going down the path of California, like they usually do. California legalized medical marijuana first, and it was a joke. It just became a gateway for recreational marijuana. We do not need to legalize marijuana, and we will not legalize marijuana on my administration. Go eat some Doritos. Come on. But for farmers, I will say this. For farmers, I'll say this. We do need to allow industrial hemp farming. That is something that does have real possibilities for prosperity for Kansas agriculture.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, this issue is personal for me. I've seen up close the effects that medical marijuana can have on people's lives. I traveled to Colorado and met a young man who actually had to leave Kansas in the middle of the night with his mother to be able to address the 200 seizures he was having a day. I'm happy to report that after 23 weeks now, he has been seizure-free for 23 weeks. We need to pass the Kansas Safe Access Act. We need to pass that and allow medical marijuana. As it relates to recreational use, I don't think we should be wasting criminal justice resources, arresting, incarcerating, trying and jailing a kid for buying a dime bag of weed. So I think it should be a citable offense. You should get a speeding ticket, a ticket the same way you would get a speeding ticket.
Senator Kelly, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
You know, my daughter is a physician who works on an oncology unit in Portland, Oregon. Every day she deals with patients who could benefit from the use of medical marijuana. Instead, she's forced to use opioids to help them with their pain. We need to legalize medical marijuana in the state of Kansas, and we need to do it as soon as we possibly can for the benefit of those we know.
All right, the next question will come from Nina Sadler with Gatehouse Media.
Former Governor Sam Brownback pushed toward a plan to ensure adequate water supplies throughout Kansas. Share your thoughts on that plan and other ways we can make progress in salvaging the precious resource of water that's critical to the long-term success of Western Kansas in particular.
Secretary Kobach, you have 1 minute to respond.
I think one thing that Senator Kelly mentioned and that I agree is that Governor Brownback did do a good thing in getting us on a starting road down to conserving our water resources. And we have to make progress down that path. No matter what party you are in or whether you're independent, we have to agree that water is a precious resource that Kansas must conserve if our irrigated farming is to continue. Now, I believe that the best path ahead lies in LIMAs, or local irrigation management areas. Those have seen huge success, where farmers come together and say we're all property owners, but we agree that we have a shared interest in this property and passing it on to our next generation and to the following generation. So I'd like to expand the Lima program so that we have farmers coming together and agreeing that we will use only X inches of rainfall in our particular region, and we will continue to preserve the aquifer in that way. Now, we also have to continue looking for some outside of the box solutions, like they're looking at actually in Wichita, of injecting water back into the aquifer. That may or may not prove to be fruitful or useful, but we have to, as all Kansans, care about water.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, I think this is an issue where we might find violent agreement on the stage today. I think we all agree that we need to do more to preserve the Ogallala Aquifer. It's the lifeblood of western Kansas. I do believe that the Brownback 50-year water plan was a good starting point. We need to do more to execute it. I've had the opportunity to talk to many water rights owners throughout the state of Kansas, and they all believe that we need to do this. They all want to be a part of the solution, and they all seem willing to come together, and despite the fact that they have a property right, they're willing to give up that property right or portions of it for the greater good. So I think this is an area where you will find a lot of agreement on stage today.
And Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
I agree. But I also think I'd go a little further. I think what we need to do is we need to invest in our research universities and at Fort Hays State, who are doing some cutting-edge work in the water issue, and we need to help them with that, make sure they have the resources to help us protect our water resources. So that's one of the ways that I will differ a little bit from my colleagues up here, is that I'll make sure that we are spending some funding on research to make sure that we have water 50 years, 100 years, 150 years from now.
And Secretary Kobach, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, I wasn't going to do a rebuttal because I thought we all agreed. But once again, from the left, we hear, oh, and don't forget a little more spending. We've always got to spend. Enough of the spending, please. It's the taxpayers' money.
All right. Next up here, we go to Dwayne Taves with KFRM 550 AM in Clay Center.
Some states have gone down the path of state initiatives and ballot referendums to allow the people of the state to make policy decisions that affect agriculture in particular. Share your view on the concept of initiative referendum and whether you would support or oppose amending the Kansas Constitution to allow initiative referendum in our state.
Mr. Orman, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, ultimately, as someone who's a political independent, this is an issue that I have mixed feelings about. You know, as an independent, I want the ability for people to step forward and say, we need to change the way we do elections. We need to change the way we run our government. Right now, we have Democrats and Republicans in charge of it. I tell people we've got the fox in charge of the hen house, and we need some way to address it so that we get more opportunity to have representation and voices in government, particularly if you're not a Democrat or a Republican. With that said, I also recognize the ability to abuse the process. So if we could limit the process to those things that reform our system and not those things that impose additional regulations and burdens, which should be rightfully left to the legislature and the governor to make those decisions, then I would be willing to move forward with something with restrictions like that.
Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, I watched what initiative and referendum has done in other states, and it's for that reason that I would oppose initiative and referendum for our state. What happens with initiative and referendum is you have millions of dollars coming in from outside your state to influence policy within your state. I think that's wrong. Kansans elect their elected officials. Their elected officials can then make decisions on their behalf. I think that is a much saner way to do it, a much safer way to do it, and I think the people of Kansas would agree.
And Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, in the abstract, it is useful to allow the people to have a voice when the government is in a gridlock and can't go anywhere. And that sometimes is a benefit of initiatives. But on the other hand, we have seen in states like California how the process is abused, and I'll agree with that. We see them imposing restrictions on farming, on ranching, on hunting, on businesses, and again, it ends up hurting more than it helps. But I would say this is really a debate in the abstract. Did you know that no state has adopted the initiative or referendum in the last century? And the reason for that is that it takes a vote of the legislature, 2/3 in the Kansas legislature in both houses, to actually adopt such a constitutional amendment. So as a practical matter, it's not something that's ever going to happen in our lifetimes.
And Mr. Orman, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
You know, I agree with that. I've always looked at reforms that are intended to make government better and say they generally fail because effectively they require the consent of the victims. They require the people in the legislature who are going to lose power to agree to give that power up. You know, we've got issues that aren't getting addressed, and I believe they're not getting addressed because we have a system of government that's no longer working for the American people. And so I think if we get into issues of discussing that, I think there are real opportunities to improve representation, improve people's voice and say in government, but I don't want to use initiative and referendum to impose regulations on industry.
All right, because we are coming up to the top of the hour, we're going to have our stations have a 10-second ID. I'm going to just throw out a quick question here. It'll be a real simple answer. We're here at the State Fair, so a simple question for each of you. We'll just go down the line here. Pronto Pup or deep-fried Oreo?
Deep-fried Oreo. Had them last night.
Yeah. You know, I was telling Secretary Kobach backstage, I've got the palate of an 8-year-old boy, so it would always be a deep-fried Oreo.
Senator Kelly?
I'm going after the deep-fried pina colada.
Okay. All right. We appreciate that. Want to thank also those who made the broadcast possible today. Farm Credit Associations of Kansas, Kansas Electric Cooperatives, Kansas Soybean Commission, Kansas Farm Bureau, Kansas Chamber, Kansas Wheat, Kansas Bankers Association, and the Kansas Corn Growers Association for making this broadcast possible. And of course, we still will have another half hour here of our debate, but we do have our radio stations across the line who will be giving a 10-second ID for to make it all legal and everything else that we have here at the Kansas State Fair, our Kansas gubernatorial debate featuring Democratic candidate State Senator Laura Kelly, Independent candidate Greg Orman, and Kansas Secretary of State Republican candidate Kris Kobach. Right now, let's pause 10 seconds for station identification here on the Kansas Information Network.
Stay connected with the news you need from 580 WIBW Topeka, WIBWNewsNow.com, and FM News 104.9.
We are back here at the Bretson Young Injury Lawyers Arena, the Kansas gubernatorial debate on WIBW Radio and the Kansas Radio Networks, and we'll resume our questioning now, and we will go back to Nick Gosnell with WIBW Radio and the Kansas Information Network.
A Kansas sheriff has talked about deputizing willing community members to allow them to carry guns and be security in Kansas schools. Is this a good solution to school violence? If not, what's your better one?
Senator Kelly, you have 1 minute to respond.
I oppose the arming of our teachers. We need fewer guns in our schools, not more. As I said before, I've been a major supporter of the Second Amendment. I will continue to be, but I also want us to reinstate gun sense policy within this state. I know I was accused of having voted for a bill that opened up constitutional carry. You know, I think it's important that we have leadership in Kansas who recognizes when they've gone too far, a mistake has been made, and can change course. If Sam Brownback had been able to do that, recognize that his tax policy was destroying our state, we would not be where we are today.
Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
We defend our president with guns. We defend our courts with guns. We defend our banks with guns. We even defend our celebrities with guns. But we defend our school children with a sign that says, "This is a gun-free zone." And then when something bad happens, we look for somebody with a gun. You have to realize that the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And you have to ensure that that good guy with a gun arrives before the event is already over. And that is the problem. That is why I agree. Specially trained teachers and other personnel who have received this training should be allowed to protect our children, because I want my children to live.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, again, I'm a gun owner and support the Second Amendment, but I don't think we make our kids safer by arming teachers. My wife is a teacher, and the idea that we would arm teachers as a way to make them safer, I don't think is the right answer. You know, with that said, you know, Senator Kelly, you talked about correcting your mistake. You voted for the bill. Let's be clear. You didn't just vote for the bill. You co-sponsored the bill. That means you thought about it. And then the explanation I heard you give on a podcast was you talked to a professor at one of the universities who said to you, you know, gosh, I'd feel really troubled if somebody walked into my classroom with a loaded weapon, and you changed your mind. Did you really need a professor to tell you they wouldn't want a kid with a loaded gun in their classroom?
Senator Kelly, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Now, I can remember being in the Senate when we were discussing concealed carry actually in the state capitol. And who was there saying, no, don't do it, it's not safe, we won't know who the bad guy is? It was our law enforcement folks, our highway patrol, other law enforcement saying, don't let this happen, it's not a good idea. I trust their judgment.
Our next question comes from Michael Schwenke with KWCH-TV in Wichita.
I'm going to overlap a little bit because it's such an important issue. I want to go back to the issue of funding public schools. The Kansas Supreme Court ruled the state continues to underfund public schools and ordered yet another increase. Do we adequately fund schools right now? Where would you find the money to satisfy this court ruling? And I want to get one more question in here too. What is a long-term solution that keeps us out of court every year?
Secretary Kobach, you have 1 minute to respond.
In the last 20 years, spending on K-12 education has more than doubled in the state of Kansas. In the last 3 years, it went up 3.9, 4.0, and $4.3 billion. And the court continues to tell us we aren't spending enough. Well, my point is, and my plan is, instead of looking at the bottom line, let's look at what money is getting into the classroom. We need 75 cents of every dollar to get into the classroom, not the 50 cents right now. You know, there's one high school in Wichita that has 12 assistant principals. My high school had one assistant principal, and I don't know what that guy did. Why does a school district or a high school need 12 assistant principals? We have got to stop spending so much money on administration and spend it instead in the classroom, on the teachers' salaries, on the computers, and on the books. That is where the money belongs. And another thing I would do, let's reward schools that have success by giving every person in that school a raise, so that when the students do better, everybody does better. The teachers, the principal, the janitor, and the coach.
Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, based on the repeal of the Brownback tax experiment, I think we have the dollars in our budget to meet the requirements that the Supreme Court has laid out. But, you know, I'm a private sector guy. I look at public education really as the only manufacturing process I know of where you don't control the quality of your inputs. What happens to that kid at night? What happens to them? Do they have to work till 2 in the morning to make ends meet? Do their parents have to work 2 jobs to be able to support them? You know, ultimately, if we want to get kids better educations, we need to grow the Kansas economy. We need to create the jobs and opportunities to allow their parents to have the time to invest in their kids' educations, and ultimately, if we do that, I think we will lift up all Kansans.
And Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
Yeah. Remember that my husband and I moved here because of the great schools. I want those great schools back, and yes, I do think that we have come up with a school finance plan that, short of inflation, funds our public schools. We can deal with the inflation issue in January when the legislature comes back. We've got the money in the kitty because we overturned the Brownback tax experiment. The money is there. And then going forward, what we need to do is we need to make sure that every single year we deal with the inflation factor. We fund the schools at that level, and we keep ourselves out of court and let our teachers do what they're paid to do, which is to teach our children.
And Secretary Kobach, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Let's do a quick math experiment. Let's imagine you have a classroom of 25 students, and we spend $14,000 per student. That's 33. I know you don't like math, but just listen. That's $350,000. $350,000. Now the teacher's salary and the computers, oh, they really don't like math. They don't like logic either. How about rational thought? No, none of the above. All right, well, the bottom line is $250,000 is being spent on administration, only $100,000 in the classroom.
The next question comes from Dina Sadler with Gatehouse Media.
Many Western Kansas business operators depend on immigrant labor and favor allowing undocumented immigrants to stay in the U.S. to work in the agriculture industry. Explain how you would address this workforce challenge.
It's hard to hear that.
Mr. Orman, you have 1 minute to respond.
You know, I've been pretty clear for a long time on my policy as it relates to immigration. I think we need to have a policy that's tough, practical, and fair. By tough, I mean we need to secure our borders. Obviously, we need secure borders. But then it has to be practical. We're not going to find and deport 11 million people, nor would it be economically advisable. Western Kansas would be decimated economically if we did that. I've been on the farms. I've been on the feedlots. I've been at the dairies. I've talked to them. They've said it would destroy their economy. So how do we make it fair to taxpayers? I believe if you're here on an undocumented basis, you should have to register with ICE by a date certain. You should have to pay a small fine or perform community service as an acknowledgement that a law's been broken. But then, if you hold down a job, you pay your taxes, you obey our laws, you should be able to stay here and work.
Senator Kelly, you have 45 seconds to respond.
I think we can all agree that our immigration laws are broken. They're not working. We need to have a grown-up conversation, though, about these laws. We need to push for comprehensive immigration reform that secures our borders, but also takes into account the needs of our agricultural and our manufacturing community. It's well past time. Our congressional delegations need to do their job, work together, and come up with this comprehensive immigration reform and take this issue off the table once and for all.
And Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
My two Democrat opponents both favor in-state tuition and favor amnesty, and they've made that clear once again. The vast majority of Americans disagree, though, and they recognize that illegal means illegal. The time has come for a governor who will look out for the American worker and for the safety of Kansas citizens before putting illegal labor first. Sanctuary cities and counties will end under my administration. We will stop giving $377 million in welfare and other public benefits to illegal aliens every year. And we will stop giving in-state tuition rates to illegal aliens when our own students can't afford to go to college.
Mr. Orman, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
You know, to be clear, what I just proposed was changing the law, not encouraging people to break the law. Ultimately, this is an issue where both parties are to blame. In 2007, Congress tried to pass immigration reform. It was the Democrats who killed it. You know, if you don't believe that, ask yourself in 2009 when they had 60 votes in the Senate, a 76-vote majority in the House, and Barack Obama in the White House, why didn't they pass the DREAM Act? In 2013, 14 Republicans actually voted for comprehensive immigration reform. It's not a Democrat position, an independent position, a Republican position. It's a broadly held position.
Our next question comes from Dwayne Tays with KFRM 550 AM in Clay Center.
Candidates, what vision do you have for the Department of Agriculture in Kansas and research and investment to support the industries?
Senator Kelly, you have 1 minute to respond.
I believe that the Department of Agriculture, in concert with our research institutions, particularly Kansas State University, have a huge role to play in the development of our agricultural economy. You know, if you look at what we have done over the past few years with the investment in the National Bio-Agri-Defense Facility at Manhattan State, as a direct result of the Kansas Bioscience Authority, which no longer exists, but it was one of the very best investments that we could have made. We stole that facility from New York, brought it to Manhattan, Kansas, where they are now doing plant and animal research that benefits our agricultural community today and tomorrow and forevermore, because we were able to bring them to the state of Kansas. I will work with the Congress. I will work with our agricultural community to keep growing institutions like that, to make sure that we have the strongest, most robust agricultural industry in the country.
Secretary Kobach, you have 45 seconds to respond.
I think the Department of Agriculture has a vital role to play in the future of Kansas agriculture. I've already talked about the local irrigation management areas, what the Department of Agriculture has to continue facilitating and building, and also spreading technological advances, not making the advances, but disseminating the information through research institutions and directly to the farmers. You know, look, a lot of what's happened in Kansas agriculture, a lot of the improvements have been through technology. We're producing a bushel of corn at 1/3 of the cost, if you adjust for inflation, that we were producing that same corn 50 years ago. So the improvements in technology, things like GMOs, which some on the left don't like, have actually allowed us to grow corn for much less money with much less water. And so the Department of Agriculture can facilitate those advances and help Kansas farmers.
And Mr. Orman, you have 45 seconds to respond.
You know, as I've traveled the state of Kansas and met with farmers and gone to the 3I conference in Dodge City, I've been amazed at how innovative our farmers are. And so I actually agree with Secretary Kobach. The Department of Agriculture can do a lot to help disseminate best practices and take advantage of all that great innovation our farmers are doing. But look, at the end of the day, this is about creating markets. This is about creating external markets. It's about creating internal markets. We have an economic development plan that, among other things, talks about embracing value-added agriculture. If we are able to pass enabling legislation on industrial hemp, we need to have the ability to go ahead and quickly put the processing facilities in place so that we can process hemp as well. Those are jobs that can't be outsourced, that can't be sent to China, and will be here forever.
And Senator Kelly, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that we need to do with our Department of Agriculture is we need to hook them up with our Department of Commerce so that they're not siloed, that they're working together to grow that industry here in the state of Kansas.
All right, here's what we're going to do. Due in part, I want to give plenty of time for the closing statements, which they will have 90 seconds for the closing statements. Let's give each candidate a round of applause for what has been a great debate today, not only for the people here, but also for the voters of the state of Kansas listening as well. Okay. Now it's on to the closing statements, and this order has also been agreed to before we came on stage today. So first off, with their closing statement, will be State Senator Laura Kelly.
First, I want to thank the State Fair for hosting this event. It's been just fabulous. And I thank all of you for joining us today, but particularly my very robust fan club. This is a big year for Kansas. The stakes have never been so high, and the choices have never been so clear. We can either go backward and repeat the last 8 years of the Brownback devastation, or we can elect a governor who will work like the devil to rebuild our state. Kris Kobach has promised to bring the Brownback experiment back, and that means cuts. Cuts to your child's school, cuts to the roads you drove on today, cuts to your health care. And Greg hasn't promised much of anything. He's pointing his finger and he complains, but that's not what Kansas needs. Kansas needs a strong, steady, experienced leader who can get to work on day one and fix our state. I'm the only candidate who has spent her life working on behalf of others, particularly our working men, women, and families. I'm the only one who's worked towards solutions all of her career. Not solutions that affect me, but solutions that affect working families. As your governor, I'll fix this mess and I'll rebuild our state. I'm Laura Kelly. I'm the only thing standing between Kris Kobach and the governor's office. I ask for your vote on November 6th.
Next up, with their closing statement, the independent candidate, Greg Orman.
Thank you all for being here today. I believe what happens over the next 5 years is going to determine the path our state is on for the next several decades. Kansas has two options in November. We can lead again and get back on the right track, or we can continue with a destructive status quo. We can continue with the same absentee leadership, the same ineffective management that is the result of politicians putting winning elections ahead of serving the needs of Kansans. The establishment has taken us badly off track and spurred 2 decades of decline. If you want that, you've got 2 pretty good choices on stage. But if you want someone who can get us back on track, who has the experience of successfully running, managing, and improving large organizations, someone who can grow the Kansas economy and help create the jobs and opportunities that will keep our kids here, and someone who has never and will not ever accept donations from PACs, lobbyists, and corporations, then I'm your candidate for governor. I've created hundreds of jobs in Kansas. I'm going to grow the Kansas economy so we can invest in our future with great schools and roads, so that we can build better pathways to career educations for our children, so that we can take care of an aging population with dignity. Kansas can have a bright future. We can get back on track, but I need your help. I ask for your vote in November. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have one final closing statement, and that comes from Republican candidate, Secretary of State, Kris Kobach.
You have seen my leadership style over the past 8 years. I keep my promises. If I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. I'm not a politician who uses empty words to try to make everyone feel happy. But I'll tell you where I stand.
And you may not agree with me, as some may not, on some issues. But you might agree with me on 2 out of 3 issues. And you'll know that on those 2 out of 3, I will deliver. And I will deliver as Kansas governor. If you've been watching this race, paying attention to the issues, you will have noticed that some of the bold new ideas are coming from the Republican side. Assigning letter grades to schools and rewarding performance. Capping property tax appraisals at 2% a year. Direct primary care in Medicaid. And no longer being a sanctuary state, but instead being an enforcement state when it comes to illegal immigration. But from the other side, just more tax and spend liberal thinking. Indeed, if you're a liberal Democrat, like some of the people shouting are, you have 2 great choices. You can have the official Democrat and the de facto Democrat. And they're also both part of the establishment. One's been in the legislature for 14 years, part of the problem. The other has been in businesses that have a very cozy relationship with government. But if you want a governor who will challenge the establishment in Topeka and rather than someone who will stick with the status quo, then I am your man. If you want to see dramatic change in Topeka, the Kobach-Hartman administration is the team for you, and we ask you for your vote.
While you continue cheering on for your candidate, my thanks to Nick Gosnell with WIBW Radio and the Kansas Information Network, Michael Schwenke with KWCH-TV in Wichita, Dina Sadler with Gatehouse Media, and Dwayne Taves with KFRM 550 AM in Clay Center. Also, our thanks to our timekeeper, Dan Johnson, and also our thanks to our interpreters. Please, let's give them a hand as well for the job they did today. We very much appreciate them being here today as well. We thank you for joining us here at the Breton Young Injury Lawyers Arena here at the Kansas State Fair in Hutchinson. For all those, for on-site engineer Rick Smith, for our studio engineer Brett Swiger, I'm Greg Akagi. Thank you for joining us on our Kansas gubernatorial debate on WIBW Radio and the Kansas Radio Networks.